So I guess it's too late now, huh?
You look cute.
Just my hoops.
Okay, so we're live now, so this is awesome. And basically what we're doing today is, this is my mom. For those of you that don't know, my name is Kiara, and I run my company called Crystal Prophecy, and I decided to ask my mom on a whim to do a video, and today just so happens to be her birthday. So happy birthday to my mom.
Thank you.
And basically what we're going to be going over is eclipses today, and astrology, and a few other topics that we'll kind of go over. But I'm just going to be asking my mom a few questions because her name is Danielle, and she's been doing this for a very, very long time in astrology and research, and learning about different things like tarot and other things like that. So if you have any questions for her as she's going over anything in the video, please leave comments, or you can message myself or her on Facebook and we will answer your questions. But basically, what is an eclipse? So there are two types of eclipses. There is a solar eclipse and then a lunar eclipse. And basically, an eclipse is an observable event that happens as a result of an alignment of the sun and moon or another planet. So that could be Mercury or Venus or Pluto and so on. But we're just going to focus on the solar and lunar eclipses and what they mean to us, why they're important, and what happens when they occur. So as our beautiful NASA explains, a lunar eclipse happens when the Earth blocks the light from the sun so that the Earth's shadow falls on the moon. And lunar eclipses happen at least twice a year and can last for a few hours. On the other hand, we have our solar eclipses that happen once every 18 months, and they only last for a few minutes, which is funny that they're different in crosses. And if you think about the solar eclipses, they are the masculine energy, and the lunar eclipses are the feminine energy. So today with mom, what I wanted to talk about with her was I want you to think about like years in your life that were pretty impacting. For a lot of people, it was 2008 when we had our economic structure having to be restructured in the fall of people who invested in homes and businesses and things of that nature. And then another occurrence that happened was during our eclipses, actually last year in 2019. We had huge eclipses both in Cancer and in Capricorn, and how those even affected us as well. My question for you, Mom, is what are important years that happened in your life that you can think of?
Well, the housing bubble, the one that you're talking about in 2008, that was very impactful for myself, and as you well know, it prompted a move from Arizona back to California, which is my home state. Your sister had just, been born the prior year. It was quite a roller coaster ride for me. There was a lot happening on the day that I was packing. Actually, it was the day after my birthday that year that we had moved, which is actually kind of interesting that I'm talking to you on my birthday. And my grandma, your great grandma, had passed as well. So that was impactful, Grandma B. So that was a very significant time. Before that, it would have been 2001. As a lot of people know who were around that time, that was the year September 11th happened, impacted us directly with a family member. But also on a personal level as well, it was a year that impacted my marriage also. but that's, you know, just part of the 18 and a half year cycles that always occur, which we're in right now. This is another impactful year for me. There's a lot of changes going on in my life on a personal level. And prior to that, it would have been right around 91, 1991 would have been another year. Um, if I go back and look at my own chart, those were years where we did have very intense eclipses, and they actually fell in twice. They fell on my lunar nodes, you know, or Rahu Ketu, or North Node, South Node, depending what astrology you're talking about.
You said in 1991.
Well, 91 was not the year that, but that was in 2001, and this year are the 2 years where it actually hit my.
So when you go to 2001 and you look at what the eclipses are, just so people know what signs they were in, that would have been Capricorn and Cancer again, which is very interesting because we
Well, no,
literally.
because it's a cycle, yeah, that 18 and a half year cycle, that it always comes back around, where the lunar nodes always come back around that 18 and a half years. And I find that that those years always impact me very, very strongly, for whatever reason, probably because of my nodes, or where my rising is. My rising sits right on 1 degree of Cancer. So
So that's actually hugely important to talk about. Just giving that as a side note for all of you that are listening in. When we're talking about astrology and why I personally believe that it's just so important, is that when you look at your three main signs, that would be your sun sign, your rising sign, or also called the ascendant, and your moon. Those three are hugely the most impacting immediately. The other aspects of your chart are other details that we can talk about in another video, and they do play a role and a part. But when you're talking about your north node and your south node, your north node is where you are going, and your south node is where you had learned just prior to coming into this life. So when she's talking about how Cancer is a big deal for her, the rising sign is how the world sees you, and it's partially how you lead with your ego in this reality. And then when I'm saying ego, I'm not saying egotistical mind. I'm saying the I am, or who your soul is and what it represents. When people first meet you, they often will see you as your rising sign, because that's your most immediate responding and how you act towards people.
One thing I've always noticed too is whenever the eclipses hit either my ascendant or my descendant, so whether they fall in Cancer or Capricorn, I always move those years. For instance, 2001, we moved like 3 times. In 2010, which was another year where the eclipses hit my nodes, I also moved. I moved from Northern California down to where I'm at now in Central California. And then again, here we come again this year. And I've been actually saying for a couple months that I feel for some reason something's going to come up in my life where I may end up moving again, possibly. It usually happens it's usually between a 6 to 8 month period that from the eclipse, when the eclipse occurs, that it actually, when I actually end up moving, something comes up. It doesn't matter if it was, you know, in certain times that was my spouse that, you know, it affected his chart, but if I still ended up moving, so it affected me directly as well. 2010, it was just myself and moving down here. So it'll be interesting how things play out the rest of this year.
So, big factors about why we're talking about all this as well. I want to give a little shout out to my aunt, who's actually watching us as well. That would be my mother's sister, Bernadette. And the funny thing about the people that have impacted your lives and what they represent in your childhood is a huge factor on how you continue the rest of this life. In my mom's case, not being too personal or anything, but my aunt very much played a role as a mother figure in their youth. And as they've gotten older, I feel like they've exchanged a lot of lessons and teachings with each other as if they were a mother daughter or sisters, or even deeper than that from past lives. So if you think about the people in your life that have impacted you on that level, that maybe they're friends or siblings, but they feel more like mentors or parents. It's hugely reflective of your childhood, your youth, and how you respond to that as well, which is very fascinating.
If I can add to that, it's usually very karmic. Karma has a lot to play with it, I believe. And if you look, for instance, at my Saturn is in Gemini. It's 20 degrees Gemini. So the Geminis that have come into my life usually have, I usually have a very karmic relationship with them, whether it be you, of course, as my daughter, or my sister, as you had mentioned, she's also a Gemini. My ex sister-in-law, even, she's a Gemini, and she's played a huge role in my life. My father is a Gemini. I think that the different planets also will reflect how people in your life, what roles they have to play in your life or play out, or lessons to be learned there too, which is, worth noting.
It was really cute the other day when, I don't know who of you that are watching or will watch have seen the video I posted on Venus, but the planet Venus is ruled by Libra. And my father is actually a Libra. So during the energy where the Venus turns its round into either Gemini or Libra or Aquarius, I feel a lot more of myself being able to communicate more and express, because I myself am a Gemini. And I don't particularly like to communicate unless I'm in a comfortable space. And it seems like every time Venus is in the air signs, I'm a bit more out of my shell and able to communicate. So it's kind of interesting if you look at it that way. For a lot of people, astrology is kind of a woo-woo subject where they're not really, it's not that they don't believe it, but they don't understand it enough to believe it. So it's cool when you start to research more in history what it means. But as we get back to the eclipses, I'm going to give you a brief little tidbit on what people in history thought eclipses were. Back in the early centuries, around 1500 and even before then, people used to think that eclipses were doomsday events because it used to block out the sun. And in different parts of the world, it depended on the religion and what they were studying and their fear behind, even during the European witch days, where they used to burn witches and everything, just because they were afraid of the subject. And they usually accredited any of these events to witches or shadow workers or vampires or even some demons at the time during their religious phases, where people would try to instill fear in the people with these celestial events. Even as noted with meteor showers and sometimes seeing the planets very close. Those were allotted to doomsdays, which is fascinating because I think it's really pretty when a solar or lunar eclipse happens. I'm like, whoa, there's a little bit of red going on there, or it's completely shadowed out, So it's very important to take note at what your belief system is at the time and how you can be open to learning instead of fear. Because every time fear happens, it's really hard to believe anything correctly.
Yeah, I believe that, well, they were considered bad omens, definitely. However, it is worth noting as well that even in today's society, if you go back and chart the eclipses and what countries actually were able to see the eclipses, those countries had, it depends where it falls in that country's chart, but it absolutely impacts that, whether for positive or negative. It will absolutely impact that country, the country that was able to fully see, whether it was a lunar or a solar, it doesn't matter. Again, as you were saying, the solar represents more the masculine aspects of our society, whereas the lunar represents more of the feminine aspects of our society, whether for good or for bad, but it is definitely worth noting too.
One of our main eclipses that are coming up here, we have a full eclipse actually June 21st, and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. But I want to talk first about the eclipse that's happening on June 5th. With all the energies that are transitioning, especially with what we're dealing with now, having to be at home and what's going on in society and how people are being forced to have to relook at what their life is and what it means to them. It's really good to pay in mind to what you want to do with yourself and how you could let go of things that no longer serve you. If you think about what an eclipse means, it could be eclipsing things that no longer serve you in your life out of your life. And I think that that's important to note, especially if you think about last year, during July 17th and 18th, when we had our eclipse that was specifically in this crazy moment where people had to think about, oh, there was a lot of passings, or people were starting to get sick or lose houses and things of that nature. I did a number of readings the last year that were insanely centered around during the eclipse phase in July, and how a lot of people had lost people even to suicide or to just these crazy events that were unexplainable. So it's really important to think about that. Go ahead, Mom.
Oh,
Are you
no,
going to
I
say
just
anything on
was
that?
adding that I knew a lot of people last year as well that they had people pass um, from very strange circumstances, and it was quite sudden and quite unexpected. There were accidents, and there were a lot of untimely deaths, which I think is worth noting. That I think that whenever our planet as a whole is getting ready to enter another shift or another phase, which we're going into so many or culminating right now at this moment in time, that I think there are a lot of deaths that occur right on the precipice of that happening, because I think, I believe that people have soul contracts when they come to this earth, and they're releasing that contract. They have fulfilled it because they're not prepared or ready to go into the next phase of what society, the where society's heading, or their purpose has already been fulfilled, or perhaps they're not able to adjust to the vibrations that are adjusting, whether it be, the earth, or with their, in a psychological manner, in a physical manner, which right now a lot of people are dealing with. All of those things are kind of happening all at once. It's how do we feel on a spiritual level, on a psychological level, on a physical level. How do we feel about, our government? How do we feel about our home life? How do we feel about our families? Our relationships are really important right now, and I think the last 2 years have been extremely important. If everybody thinks about it, they've had a lot of people in their life that they've completely cut out, that they've had no contact with for the most part in the last couple of years, because everybody on a soul level has been preparing for this next phase that we're stepping into, that we're all going to be changing roles. I mean, just everybody. And nothing's going to be the same moving forward from this day forward. But those are my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, and that's awesome. That's why I really wanted to do a video with Danielle, my mom, because she has all this feedback and this information that she's been researching for a very long time. My aunt had mentioned, is it a solar or lunar eclipse? So June 5th is going to be a penumbral lunar eclipse. So it will be the divine feminine on June 5th, and it's going to be in Sagittarius. So I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about that. With a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, what would what would people be looking out for in that eclipse, and who would it be affecting?
So with lunar eclipses, they always fall in the opposite sign of the sun sign because it's always during a full moon. So if everybody kind of thinks about how they feel during a full moon, the full moon, of course, is the ultimate, feminine energy. But how do people feel? So again, these words, your emotions, your feelings. How do you feel about things? How do you feel about your relationships? How do you feel about where you fit in other people's lives, within your own self, with your spirituality, even your health, your day-to-day living situation, your career. I think it's going to be a time of really settling your emotional responses to what's going on right now in the world, but also on a personal level. It's important to think of how you feel during a full moon. People always, senses get heightened, and a lot of emotion and a lot of, just a lot going on during a full moon. So it's just more intensified basically around an eclipse. It's an intensified times 10 basically. And they usually last, it can last anywhere from 3 months up to a year when you're talking about an eclipse, especially when you're getting the penumbral is basically just under 100% full. So it's going to be intensified even more so. So again, it's your emotional responses towards situations in your life, basically, and the world at large.
I wanted to mention that to repeat that the lunar eclipses are during the full moon, and then solar eclipses are during a new moon. So when you think about like what your feelings are in the shadow, which is why when you see the sun creates that orange hue when that during, is it the lunar or the solar? I can't remember. I'm like trying to remember the flare that happens in the background, because there is that the red hue versus just the completely blacked out.
Yeah, the lunar will always be like more of a darker reddish kind of color because it's darker. It's the moon, so it can go completely black a lot of times. But the solar is where you're going to get the brighter, the orange or the bright red around around the circular formation is because that's the sun coming in. The sun's being blocked basically. So at that moment too, you have to think, okay, so what in your life have you not released that are you ready to release now? And again, it's, solar always has to deal with masculine energy. So what is it about the masculine aspects of your life, your money, your finances, your career, your things of a more material matter will basically come into focus during a solar eclipse. What of those things do you need to release would be a good time, again, because new moons are time where normally new moons are times that you would sit and think, what do I want to start right now? What do I want? So it's a time of beginnings, but it's also a time of endings, because you have to release something in order to start something new.
And really quick, the solar eclipse will be June 21st. So when you're thinking about what my mom's saying, all of the emotional values and the feeling and the feminine energy will be around June 5th. And then that is a lunar eclipse. And then during June 21st, which she just mentioned about the masculine, the finances, and foundations, that will be around June 21st. And that is a solar eclipse. That way you can think ahead, okay, this is what's happening, this is what will be going on. And those are the most upcoming eclipses. So getting back, since we mentioned both of those, and you're welcome, whoever is watching, to go back and re-listen if you missed any of that so that you can apply the information. But the next thing that I wanted to ask you, Mom, is why do you think that some people don't believe in astrology / spirituality? And why do they just see the sun sign specifically and aren't knowing of the details of the other parts of the chart?
Well, I think that I think that a lot of it is conditioning. How were you brought up? What were you what were you taught as a child? How were you conditioned to be open to the world? Were you conditioned to only focus on practical matters and things of a material value? Or were you taught to be creative and to explore and to be more open to um, other aspects of life? I think a lot of it has to do with our upbringings, whether people are willing to explore things like astrology or not. um, I myself, I was brought up in a, my parents were children of the, the hippie generation. So they were kind of open to anything and everything, in a lot of ways. I mean, in some ways they weren't, but as far as my sister and myself were concerned, we were allowed to kind of, think about things as long as we kind of kept it to ourselves and didn't really talk to other people about it. Then we pretty much were able to kind of come up with our own charted path, for the most part. So I think that, just relating it to myself compared to others, I just think it really has a lot to do with how you're brought up and how you're, whether you're allowed to use that, to think outside the box, or if you are basically taught to be more confined to a very linear way of thinking, only means to an end, right? Only practical matters, only you have to get a job, you have to make money, you have to just be the perfect person in your society, law-abiding citizen? Or do you explore your feelings a little bit more? Do you can still be a good person and be a law-abiding citizen and still kind of explore those somewhat taboo. I mean, those things were very taboo in my youth, where a lot of people just kind of, they didn't really understand the depths and the knowledge involved with astrology and astronomy and physics and different things like that. So it's just, I think that has a lot to do with it, is your upbringing.
It's been a very recent transition for it to become more popularized, because of the recent 10 years. That's pretty much been it. It's even been like more so 5 years that this is an up and coming topic. There's always been horoscopes, which I personally don't recommend because horoscopes are so broad and they don't fit. But if you're thinking about looking into horoscopes, what I would recommend is, like I said, you need to look up what your rising sign is, your moon, and know your sun sign. And then you can apply the horoscope depending on what the topic is to those different parts of you. Because if you think about what those three immediate signs represent, your sun sign is your I am, who you are, what you represent, and it's your masculine sign energy. Your moon is the feminine energy, and it's how you see your mom in a way. It's how you're connected to your mom, but it's also your emotional connection, because if you think of the moon, you think of the cycles, and that's that application. Your rising sign is pretty much your go-to on this plane, because when you are on Earth, at the time that you are born, your rising sign is determined based off of where you are on the planet and what time you were born. Because when you look at the horizon, then you will have your zodiac signs that are there. So it's very interesting if you're going to look at it with horoscopes. But my biggest thing that I would say, if you want to research more about this, my mom's been using a website for a long time that I have adopted to use. It's called a lab with an E at the end.com. and you can get a free chart there, and kind of just get a basic understanding of your chart and everything. You will need your exact time of birth and where you were born. It's just better that way. I know some people are like, I don't know what time I was born. Try to get it as exact as you can, because time plays a role. The other question that I have for you, Mom, is as far as history goes, which this could go on for a long time, so I'll kind of keep you in a little bit of a line with it. Yeah. But as far as history goes, people know about the Mayans and the Egyptians. But if we talk about some of the lesser known and understood civilizations like Atlantis or Lemuria or Astrologus or Mania, each of these different ancients, how does astrology align to the history of our ancients? How did they use astrology?
Oh, I think they used it a lot more in their society than and their culture than we do now. I believe that we are actually we are relearning what was already known centuries ago. I believe that there have been, the earth, just as people go through changes and cycles, the earth has as well. If you've ever heard of the Milankovitch cycle, which is every, 12,500 years or something to that effect. The earth goes through these great changes. And if you go back in history, even what can be proven, those were, the last one was the great ice age. So, as the earth has gone through changes, there have been cataclysms. There have been, I believe that there have been these great cataclysms, earthquakes, tsunamis, whatever, that have completely changed the topography of our earth. And it has buried a lot of these cultures, these great ancient cultures, they're underwater. I know that there are some archaeologists that have found some ruins underwater, but I don't think that we have even touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that. And I think it actually played a larger role in their life, because even if you look back to the Mayans, I studied the Mayans quite a bit when I was in my 20s, and I was fascinated by how advanced they were with their astrology. And they used astrology to do everything from planting their crops to marriage. When was the best time to have a baby? When was the best time to get married? To what's your name going to be because you were born on this certain day? If you everything was done in accordance to the cycles of the stars and the planets. They had such great, vast knowledge, again, that we are only now beginning to revisit. And I think a lot of that has to do where we're going into, we're moving into the age of Aquarius. Right now, where it's a lot of Capricorn energy just everywhere. We're going through all of these transits.
Work.
Well, and that's it. Capricorn's very, it's hard. It's a hard planet to deal with, when you're dealing with Saturn, because it's about restrictions. It's about government. It's about, how are you going to navigate this, this world with such pressure on and such a narrow frame of reference. I think once we completely get out of all this Capricornian energy and move into the Aquarius energy, I think that things will become a lot more apparent. Spirituality will open up more, where people will be, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could say, a Christian can be spiritual. If it doesn't matter what religion you are or anything else. It's like the spirituality is how you relate as a person to God and to the universe. And I think that it's going to become really important. And astrology plays a large part in that, because it's basically just a tool to help you understand patterns and and personality traits, and the right timing in doing certain things, or perhaps a certain career to follow, because um, you know I mean, I could go on and on forever, and I'm trying to keep it keep it to a minimum as I can. But I think that moving into all of this Aquarian energy that we're going into, especially in 2021, I think things are going to be a lot different, and people are going to be more open to using tools such as astrology, or become more spiritual in wanting to relate to other people, and also to God and to the universe. I think it's going to be very important.
Something that in my research, because for a long time I wanted to become an archaeologist or a paleontologist for the dinosaur study, and just getting into the archaeology and anything that had to do with it. When you research these different cultures, as you can see in all texts across the board, they were always looking at the celestial mentors, which were the moon, the sun, the sky, the earth, all of these very planetary energies.
Yes,
And
yeah.
when you think about that, how that applies to what my mom was talking about, with making sure that they could feed themselves, making sure that they were able to take care of their children, or even have children safely, and seasons, and that much, things that they couldn't have known about unless they had technology. Being able to understand astrology gave them like a better way so that they could survive during the times that they were living in.
Yeah,
And
it gave them the tools to navigate those things that were pertinent to their life, which were the basics, but also they developed very large and complex societies based on all of these principles of astrology and engineering and physics, and they had all of this knowledge that right now, again, we are just relearning, because I believe a lot of it has been lost due to, the cycles that the earth has gone through, that, civilizations have just, we're human, and we are, we things have happened, and cultures have died out, and so now it's just interesting how we are going to incorporate that back into our life, and how we have, and how I think it's going to really escalate, and and I think a lot more people are going to be open to the idea that there's not one right way, that you could still be open to someone else's approach to, again, spirituality, or what they want to learn and what they're striving for, and still, do things your own way as well, and both ways can be right. They don't have to be wrong, and I think that's an important lesson. I think that all of us are learning right now, especially being on lockdown. It's
yeah.
like, what's important to you? What's important to you? What's important to how you communicate with people? What's important to how you spend your time? What you're doing with your time? How you're teaching people or learning? Because you can still be a teacher, and you can still learn so much. And I think that's so important to remember.
If we think about just kind of turning it all back into the eclipses, we're going to go into a little bit about the native culture, and how that has been brought up in the Kachina history. And then I want to talk a little bit more about why these eclipses are a big deal in the past couple of years, last year, this year, and next year. Because when you think about what's happening right now, I wanted my mom to talk a little bit more about how this eclipse applies to the virus, and last year how there was a warning sign to what this could have been in astrology.
That's a loaded question. um,
Get it? No, I'm just kidding.
so, well, coming into the eclipse back in December, it was a warning. It was a foreboding of what was to come. Um, Capricorn and Cancer again, playing huge roles. Cancer being our security, our home, our foundations, whereas Capricorn again being the government and politics and restrictions and structures and financial economic structures. All of that, especially coming into from December and January, basically where they hit, and with all of the planets sitting in Capricorn, I think I touched on this a few minutes back. That with so many planets in Capricorn, basically, we're facing a time that hasn't happened in our history for probably, I think it's about 726 years, if I'm not mistaken. And all of our structures, our foundations, our politics, everything's going to have to completely be restructured. But for anything to be restructured, it has to fall, it has to crumble, it has to hit ground zero. So it's kind of ironic, or is it, that with this virus coming around, especially called the corona, dealing, corona with the sun, right? Or Chronos, if you look at it that way, the destroyer, right? So it's coming in to destroy all that we know, to be able to rebuild those foundations, the economy, politics, government, what we consider our, structural environment. So, and it's really important leading up into the summer, because in here we hit, Sagittarius in Cancer, right? So those two eclipses are going to be important too, because it's gonna hit our, our faith, it's like, who do we consider to be our teacher? Who do we consider to be, what do we want to abide by when it comes to spirituality? What do we believe in? And also, what can we learn? And, how can we teach? And also, Cancer being very important with our home, or where we live, what we consider stability, what we considered our, stable foundation, our comfort zone. What's our comfort zone, and what does that consist of? And how are others related to that? So I think right now is a really pivotal time, I think, in everybody's life, and everybody's had, I think, a really rough last 2 years between 2018 up until this hit, which was, at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of people had a lot of stuff going on in their lives where it was preparing them. It was preparing them, whether they knew it or not, for what's happening now. Again, people falling away, what's important to them. A lot of people have moved. A lot of people have gotten out of relationships that may have even been long-term, done away with people that no longer, they don't resonate with. So those things actually kind of prepared us for what we're going through now. But it's a complete restructuring of at the top level and at our base level. So I think in a nutshell, that's pretty good.
That was awesome. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, if we think about that, we apply it to ourselves, going back as you revisit the video or whatever you're thinking about with yourself, thinking about this eclipse that's coming up in June, and we do have more eclipses in the year. We only mentioned the one in June, but we will have another one later in the year. I think it's around December. Just thinking like, okay, preparing myself, what am I going to do once I'm out of this whole being stuck at home phase? Where am I going to go? Do I want to continue the job that I have been doing currently? Do I want to change the things that I am doing in my life? And do I want to change? Because nobody really wants to change. But sometimes we are being forced. And obviously, as we've noticed, the entire globe is experiencing a unified be at home mantra. And that hasn't happened in a very, very long time. So it is thinking about, okay, what makes me happy overall? Um, just talking a little bit about myself, I've been very, very frustrated being stuck at home. I am a workaholic at times. I like to put my mind in my work. And especially with recently, I've been working on this deck of mine that's been a very passionate endeavor, and working 3 different jobs as well as making my deck. So once all of that came to a halt, it really threw me on, for lack of a better term, my butt, because I didn't know what to do next. There was a halt. So, for those of you who do not have jobs and are frustrated and confused and don't know what you're doing, just thinking like, okay, well, who am I and what do I want? What do I see myself doing? And if you ask yourself that question, I think you'll come up with some things to work with for once we are out of doing the at home requirement.
Um,
Yes.
Something too that people should be aware of is that during the summer, both both Mars and Venus go retrograde this summer. And usually they don't usually do a retrograde together. I mean, it's several years when they actually hit the same year where they actually go retrograde at during the same time. I think that speaks a lot to people's, because you're talking about Mars, which has a lot to do with people's, their career, but it also has to do with how they deal with anger, how they respond, right? Because it's that masculine energy. And Venus, right? Relationships, partnerships, but partnerships on all levels. So not just just not relationships with a significant other, but partnerships on a business level too. So those 2 planets, basically it's telling everybody to take a step back and to think what really works for you, and what no longer works. You need to get rid of that, and tell yourself, okay, what serves my purpose, to and to basically find a balance between the two, between Venus and Mars, which is not an easy task. But I think everybody's being forced to take a look at those 2 major areas of their life and decide, what hasn't worked for them, and they need to get rid of them. Again, eclipses, right? Letting go and starting something new. And what will they do that they could move into their new future, into this new world, into this new reality that's basically happening with everybody right now.
Um, Auntie mentioned something about the crown chakra question mark. Did you mention something about the crown chakra earlier?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm not sure what she's talking about, but maybe she'll ask again and then I can look back into it. But just kind of as an overview, this has been a wonderful time speaking with you. I really enjoy that we get to do this and share this with a lot of people. There's so many questions that people have when it comes to this unknown, and it's really good to look at the unknown without the fear and just go at it and just be like, okay, we're doing this together, and finding your support systems and the people that you hold dear, whether that's friends, parents, partners, your animals, nature, whatever it is, your practice, trying to invest your time and your energy into that focus so that you can feel very in flow and feel very I don't know, just happy with you. This is a huge reflection on how we can kind of deal with ourselves and look within. And by doing that, we'll be able to reflect that externally as well. Um, yeah, I don't see her question yet. So I guess if she wants, we can tell her about it a little bit later if she had a question on it. But overall, the final topic that I'll just mention really quick, I mentioned the Kachinas earlier. I had watched a video not too long ago that reminded me a lot about the natives' belief in the supernatural. I don't know what they're called like to them, but the translation is star people. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there is the idea behind the blue star kachina, which, if you've heard of what that is, that's awesome. I could be butchering this, but my belief is that there is the blue star kachina and the red kachina. And if you think of the Matrix, that's the blue pill and the red pill. So with the blue star kachina, once the blue star kachina is coming to the planet, it is said that the blue star kachina will meet with the people that are part of the cousins, the family, the nephews, and the blue star kachina will help take those people home. As far as the red kachina, is said to come to the planet to clean the planet and heal the planet. And I'm not sure what that is a representation of, but it does remind me of this time a lot, because it feels like the people who are being called to come together and be together are starting to show that they're standing up and standing in their power. And the people that are choosing to hide and just be within their self and not showing who they really are, I feel like those are the people that are going to have a harder time dealing with the up and coming transitions, because we will not be going back to the way things used to be prior to when all of this has gone down. And if you think about the eclipses included in that, really try to just accept that everything will be anew and you yourself can be recreated as something great as well. Um, Auntie said, I was just mentioning that the corona, meaning crown, related perhaps to the crown chakra. What do you think about that?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's very interesting. So if you think about, well, what I would think of when I first think of a crown is you think of royalty, right? You think of the king. You think of that Capricornian energy, the top, the politicians. So I think, again, I think it represents a lot of what we're going through right now. So how are we going to relate to our government? How are we going to relate to, so it's kind of that splitting too between the government and perhaps our, our God, our spiritual side. So what are we going to believe in more? What are we going to cultivate? What are we going to trust? So I think a lot of it has to do with trying to decide how you can basically navigate between this split that's basically occurring right now, where it's kind of interesting that they've shut everything down, including gatherings and churches, and no coming together. We just had a holiday, we just had Easter, where a lot of people are, a lot of religious people, that's a very, very big, um, a big time for them, when they really praise their God. And again, the crown chakra. So with the crown chakra, of course, you're a little bit more versed in chakras themselves, but I'm just thinking on a kind of symbolic level, how this can represent the difference between our God and our leaders, who we're told to put our faith in, our trust in, and to believe everything they say, or do, and also in our own personal lives, how we put our trust into our God and our beliefs, and how that completely affects every aspect of our life. So I think that that's really interesting. I think that you can probably add more as far as how you feel it relates to the actual crown chakra itself, which I know is the opening that leaves us, open to receive that information from God. But that's kind of my take on it. What's your take?
Yeah, so really quick before I get into the crown chakra, I have a friend, Mockingbird, who had mentioned in a comment about the blue star Kachina that I'll mention just really quickly. He had said the blue star is to reveal him or herself to the people, to lead the people through the wisdom of the mockingbird into the house of Maka. I don't know if I butchered that, which you can help me with that. But yeah, I think that that was a beautiful commentary on your idea of the crown chakra. And thank you, Mockingbird, for your mention for the Kachina, because I know that you are of Native cultural heritage. So it's very good to hear the insight behind that as well. When it comes to the crown chakra as an overview, because we could go on obviously on and on and on with all of this awesome information, which we will do another video. But the crown chakra to me is the embodiment of kind of like, if we have like a string that's connected to us, and that string is going straight up into the ethers, energy, essence, spirit, God, whatever you believe. I think that with the virus, this is a stint in our connection to that higher energy. So the people who have been affected by this, whether it be through someone else or themselves, I feel like that has hindered their connection to their energy. Not being able to breathe is one of the symptoms of this virus. And I think that that's harsh because the breath of life, if you think of it that way, is another revelation to the crown chakra, because your throat chakra breathes the energy in. It's how you communicate your integral truth. And your connection to spirit is how you speak your integral truth. And if you are unable to breathe, then you are most likely unable to speak as well. And that could be taken metaphorically or literally. Um, but I mean, if you're thinking about us being at home when it comes to the crown chakra, I feel like we're able to cultivate our ability and capability by learning about ourselves, our shadow self, especially. Because, like I said, I'm a bit stir crazy, and I'm sure a lot of other people are. This helps you realize, what is my shadow? My shadow is a part of me, and my shadow is a part of my crown chakra and all my chakras, because all of the essence of who I am is intertwined with light and shadow. So when you think about it that way, I think that this is an opportunity for people to develop. If you've noticed that a lot of people are, if they are stuck with their families, they're spending more quality time with their family. And that can be a beautiful thing, and be a very stressful, hard thing, because if you're used to being at work, you might be a little bit temperamental with handling your family or dealing with the stresses that are at home when you're distracted with your work base. So I think it's an opportunity for sure to delve deeper into what you consider to be a part of all of the aspects of who you are, which is what I think the crown chakra represents, because it's like a lotus that has bloomed. And if you know anything about the lotus, the only way that a lotus can seed and grow is in really dirty, murky, yucky water. And that's how it blooms. So I think that that's what I would say to the crown chakra relevance. But yeah, so as far as all of this, we are definitely heading towards this ascension. I feel like, although that sounds really woo woo, I really believe it, because I've even noticed with myself, it's almost like weird things are happening that I would encourage other people to take notice of. If you're spending more time outside, maybe you feel connected to the earth and you can hear it talking. Or if you're spending a lot of time with yourself, maybe you feel stronger, or you've noticed that you look healthier for some reason, even if you haven't changed your regime. I really think that that has to do with us heightening vibrationally. And when we mention what had happened on April 4th, for those of you that had taken part of it, around 7 o'clock at night, I believe, 7:30, I think is when we did it. Was it the meditation?
Mm-hmm.
On April 4th, we did this global meditation where many people had shared, and I had posted definitely on that date to encourage people to do it as well. But if you felt that energy at 7:30 Arizona time, I couldn't even tell you what it felt like. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And as an ending note to our video, if you look up what happened vibrationally on April 4th at 7:30 after the prayer, you will notice that the Earth's sphere of vibrational energy went up to a degree that it has never been recorded in history. So that's something to think about as well. But as far as this goes, I think this was a really good video, and I had a lot of fun talking to you, Mom. It was awesome, and I'm so happy we got to do this on your birthday.
I had fun talking to you too. A lot of interesting topics that you and I have talked about extensively. It's kind of hard to kind of bring it out on on the spot and to but again it's that stepping out of, I think a lot of people need to kind of this is a good time to step out of your comfort zone and to try to share your knowledge with some other people, because I think that I think we all need a little bit of encouragement and some shared knowledge, and I think it will do us all good right now. I think it's a good time for that.
Everybody says happy birthday to you. so
Thank you.
So thank you guys all again, and we'll definitely talk more on different topics. If you have questions, we'll do a video on it. I really like talking with my mom, and we do this all the time just to ourselves, but it's nice to share it every once in a while if it's about a specific topic. And if you have any questions, you can I will tag Mom in the video so that you can direct message her if you have questions, or if you have questions for me, you're welcome to leave a comment or send a direct message as well. Again, my company is Crystal Prophecy, and my website is crystalprophecy.live. And if you want to know more about my mom, we'll figure out ways to do a contact email or anything. If you want a reading or insight or just have questions, definitely hit me up and I will put her information in there, even if we have to create a new email. So thank you guys all for listening. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.